Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We will be covering the NCAA decided to halt all NIL investigations until further notice after the kerfuffle they had with Tennessee in the court system. Then we will get into some teams that won the Combine. The Combine is always a great place for teams to bolster their recruiting pitch. So tons of teams had a really, really good day and definitely will be using that into the 2025 recruiting cycle. Then we have most important position coaches in the SEC, some of the unsung heroes of these staffs, super important guys. And then we have another Top 10 Tuesday coming your way. Today it's going to be highest impact transfers as I see it. Tons of guys out there and tons of different opinions on this. So definitely let me know what you guys think about this list at the end of it. But let's jump underway, right? Actually, before we do that, I want to remind you all that we have a lot of questions come in throughout the show, and the best way for y'all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions come across the screen. We can have a fun back and forth here. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump underway because it has been a wild time in college football. And recently, there's been a lot of NIL battles, particularly the NCAA going against Tennessee and Virginia in the court system. The NCAA seems to have lost that battle, and they have been sort of waving the white flag as of yesterday. Charlie Baker on Friday decided to halt all NIL investigations until further notice. This comes obviously after Tennessee court system decided that a lot of their enforcement of these rules was violating antitrust laws. So the NCAA is obviously in a very, very tough position here. They're slowly losing more power in the college football world, and it is something they have to get a control of because I think we all know that the Wild West when it comes to NIL isn't good for anyone. I don't think it's good for the coaches. I don't think it's good for the players. I don't think it's good for the fans or the teams because, first of all, you don't know who's going to be around at any given moment, really. You don't know if any guy's going to ask for $1 million at the end of the season. If you don't pony up, he's going to walk out the door. And for fans, you build bonds with players. You don't want to see players leave for the wrong reasons or get taken advantage of, especially in the recruiting world, because there are plenty of coaches out there that want to get the job done so bad that they might promise some money that they don't necessarily have to promise. So there is a lot of worry about this. I think the NCAA was obviously late to the party when we talk about all of this stuff. I mean, it came to California and Florida passing laws before they could actually jump in and set up some rules. And then the rules they set up are not necessarily legal, it seems. So they are in a very, very tough situation, and in a tough situation with something that they really can't be. It will really hurt the sport if NIL is allowed to go entirely unchecked for however long this lasts. So the NCAA really does have to get some type of structure underway, or the inevitable that we've all been kind of looking towards is going to happen in the NCAA really won't be a thing anymore. There will be a new governing body at the very least over college football because that's where the majority of the NIL money is going to and where the majority of these, big cases that we've heard about, the Jaden Rashada case, Nico Iamaleava, all of these guys that have had very interesting circumstances around NIL, and it just doesn't help anyone to not have structure around this thing. So the NCAA is kind of on a ticking clock at this point. They have let a lot of things pass them by and then have had to play catch up, and now they're at a point where if they don't catch up quickly, I could very well see, we talked about it yesterday, the SEC and the Big Ten seem to want out. It very much seems to be pointing in the direction of the SEC and the Big Ten doing their own thing and kind of jumping ship and setting up camp for themselves. And especially if NIL is not getting a handle on. I think it makes even more sense to do that, because not only can you set up a comprehensive set of rules, but you don't have to have 134 teams following it. You only have to have 40 or whatever the number is at the end of the day with the SEC and Big Ten, because there are a lot of dominoes still to fall there, as we all know. And there's tons of different stuff to worry about here. Obviously, with the wrinkle that we talked about earlier is a lot of the enforcement rules that the NCAA had in place do violate antitrust laws, and the question is, where do you start on new rules possibly for NIL? Where does that jumping off point? Because if the NCAA's rules violated antitrust, who's to say the next person that takes a crack at it won't be doing the same thing? So there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot of different viewpoints on these issues. A lot of people that are against NIL, a lot of people that don't believe it's helpful for the game. And for me personally, I'm all for NIL. I think it makes sense that these players that put everything on the line every single day for a university gets a cut of what they're worth. That's the name of sports, the name of business in general. So I have no problem with them capitalizing off their name, image, and likeness. I have no problem with them doing all of the things and making the most money possible, because as we know, there are a lot of college kids that need money. So it's not a crazy thought by any means. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be helpful for anyone, especially the players, if there's no structure around this. If coaches are allowed to walk into rooms, make promises, and then walk out the door with no intention of coming through on those promises, we have a problem on our hands, because there are a number of kids that are going to, whether it's commit to the wrong school out of high school or in the transfer portal, decide to go to a school because of the NIL money he can make, but miss the opportunity to go to the school that would actually develop him as a person and a player. There's so many different parts of recruiting that if we let NIL go unchecked and we let rules and regulations kind of go out the window, we're going to lose a lot of what makes college football. We're going to lose the undying support for one fan base from a team, or one player towards a team. We're going to lose some of the nuance of recruiting. There's going to be a lot of bidding wars, not so much, pitching what the school can offer you, which is kind of a thing of a bygone era at this point, at least according to Nick Saban. He says they don't talk much about student in the athlete part of their visit, but that's another point that we can get to later. But I think it just creates problems for these players, and the entire sport should be catered around what makes the most sense for the players. And the NIL game, pretty much since it started, has been not desirable. I'll put it that way. It has been rough. It has been up and down. No one really knows what they can or can't do, and it's why a lot of people have gotten into trouble with it, because the NCAA was playing catch up, threw in some rules, and then no one really understood the rules in action, because they hadn't shown it in action, because they had to play catch up. So there were tons of problems with this from the get-go, obviously. The NIL game came very quickly, and if we didn't, preemptively jump in, at least the NCAA, if they didn't preemptively jump in to the conversation and at least 3 or 4 years before the entire windfall of states that pass laws, I think we'd be in a much better spot. I think we'd have a much better understanding of what the rules are. I think players would be much happier with the way that things run. And I think schools would have, at least a more level playing field than it is today, where, as we know, there are the haves and the have-nots in this game, and the haves just got a absolute gift from Charlie Baker with no NIL investigations, because a lot of money can go out of those programs with no problem, and if they're left unchecked, it could get bad very quickly, is the way I'll put it, because these players, I mean, they're coming out of high school or they're in college and they're trying to make money. I don't think there's any problem with that. I don't think there's any debate on that, and coaches know that. So you worry, obviously, that these kids are going to make a decision because of the dollar figure that's put in front of them and then get onto campus and, for whatever reason, not necessarily that he actually doesn't like the coach, because I'm sure there would be a lot of situations where they like the coach, they like the team, they like the energy around the fan base, but when you get on campus, it just doesn't feel like home, which I think a lot of kids in college and right after college, like myself, would tell you that's a lot of the battle, is just finding a place that feels like you belong there, feels like a place that you can set up shop for a couple of years. So basically, all of this is going to come to a head, and it's slowly building towards probably a new entity watching over college football, whether that's the college football playoff or a totally new thing, I'm not sure. But there's going to be a busy couple of months here for the NCAA and for surrounding parties, because letting NIL go unchecked is super dangerous. It increases the transfer portal rate. It increases the number of kids that are just left out of college football altogether, because, as we know, not a ton of kids that go into the transfer portal actually come out with an offer. About 20% of them actually find their way to a school, and then some play lower levels, some play different, types of football, but some just go back to being a student. So it's not good for anyone when NIL is allowed to run rampant and have no checks over it. So the good news is I think answers are coming, because they absolutely have to. I don't know what form it takes. I don't know if it's a new governing body. I don't know if it's the NCAA taking back control and actually getting this thing on the right track, but it's going to come, and it better come quickly, because if not, it could really hurt college football for quite some time. But enough with the kind of Debbie Downer talk here for the time being. We are going to take a short break here, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about some teams that won the Combine. As we know, the Combine is watched by tons of recruits, and they see which teams perform the best. They see which teams seem to develop the guys into a position to be at the next level, and there are definitely some teams that stood out, and it is a lot of the teams that you would expect. But stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the NIL investigations being halted by the NCAA and the implications of that going down the road. Tons of unknowns there. But it is time to talk about the teams that won the Combine. There are so many teams across college football that we're watching. Tons of their athletes really have really solid days and show that they can develop talent, which is a ton of the battle in the recruiting world. So definitely a big recruiting win for some of these teams. But before we jump into that segment, I do want to remind you all that we get tons of questions and inquiries throughout the show. The best way for you guys to get through to the show and have your questions or comments pop up on the screen is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It is a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. If you want to watch and have a fun back and forth, we can definitely do that. So use that link. Again, it's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump in. There are so many teams that had great days. There are so many players that had great days. But in the world of college football, recruiting is 90% of the job, it feels like at this point. I'm sure coaches would tell you the same. It is absolutely insane the amount of work they have to do, whether it's in-home visits or flying around in their helicopters to different high schools or what have you. But luckily for them, around combine time, they get to sit back for a second and let their former players do the work for them. So there are a couple of teams, and they are the teams that you expect to be here, that had really, really good days, that showed that they can develop talent at a elite level. Some teams that struggled with that in the past, and we'll start with one of those teams right now. Texas had a day. I don't think there's any other way to put it. Let's start, obviously, with Xavier Worthy breaking the 40 time. Never a bad thing for your program to see your guy up top and have that as a recruiting pitch. Although the 40, you can weigh the importance of that as you please. But at the very least, when every player around high school football looks at that list, it will be a Texas player up top. And that means something. It depends how much to each player, but it means something. Let's start with the defensive side of the ball. Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat did their thing. I don't think there was any worry about either of these guys necessarily slipping too much, but Tavondre Sweat came in at 366. It's a big weight to be moving around in, and he had some questions to answer, and I think he ticked off all the boxes. Obviously, nothing was overly elite when you look at the vertical or the 40-yard dash, but I think going through workouts, he showed teams what they needed to see. I don't think there's any question about that. And then Byron Murphy was one of the best D linemen in the entire day. I mean, he did pretty much everything across the board incredibly well. There were a number of guys that had him already in the top 15 that came away from that thinking maybe he's a little bit too low. So he might have played himself into the top 12. I know the Broncos are looking for some trade packages, so it could be a very interesting day for Byron Murphy. I think he goes somewhere between 10 and 20, but we'll see, because there's a big difference between that number 10 pick money and number 20 pick money for sure. But otherwise, Jalen Ford had a solid day. Didn't necessarily do anything spectacular, but I think he's someone that, if not drafted in the late rounds, could go as an undrafted free agent. And then JT Sanders had a great day. Was one of the better pass-catching tight ends out there. Showed a ton in the route tree work, because in tight ends today, they're going to put a lot on you in the passing game. And JT Sanders obviously had to run a ton of routes in Steve Sarkisian's offense, so plenty comfortable doing that. The other pass catchers, A.D. Mitchell was the guy. I don't think there's any question about that. He did everything as elite as you possibly could have hoped from him, and really solidified himself into the first round, and possibly pretty high in the first round. There have been a lot of differing reports, but at the very least, if he's there at 32, the Chiefs, I feel like, will be taking him. And then Xavier Worthy. There's some mock drafts out there that have him going 32 to the Chiefs. So both these guys just had great days. Obviously, Worthy ran the 40 and then was doing interviews the rest of the time. But sometimes that's all you need when you have enough good game tape out there like Worthy has. But some off-the-radar guys for Texas. Keelan Robinson had a really good day and I think played himself into a draft pick Christian Jones and Ryan Watts the same. Ryan Watts especially really showed off his athletic ability when I think there were a couple of Texas fans that were surprised that he left a little bit early, but he really showed out and probably, almost definitely, I think, played himself into the draft. But let's keep moving here. I think the team that won the day, the team that had the best day across the board, is Florida State. And that comes as no surprise. I mean, obviously, a fantastic team that was losing a lot of guys this year. So it starts, obviously, with Jared Verse, just a freak, an absolute freak of nature. I've seen a mock draft with him going to the Falcons, and it seems more and more that my hometown team will be going with an edge rusher. So if they do, I'd be more than happy with Jared Verse being that guy. Trey Benson, the running back, had a very good day, ran a 4.39, answered a ton of questions, did a lot of really, really good work throughout his workout. And in that running back class, I'm sure there's someone out there that has him as running back one right now. And then Keon Coleman had a solid day. There were tons of wide receivers that had pretty remarkable days, so not exactly sure where he falls in the pecking order. Probably somewhere in the Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey group, I would assume, but who knows. But had a really solid day, showed off his physical ability. But the guy that stole the show, and I think we all saw it, was Braden Fisk. He was just remarkable going through every single workout. He was remarkably explosive. His change of direction was just absurd for a guy that size. He gets as low as can be. I know some of you saw the overlap between him and Byron Murphy going through the bags workout, and man, Braden Fisk got all the way to the ground before exploding through that last turn. So there's a ton to like about this kid. His motor is off the charts. He loves football. There's no two ways about that. That dude plays with an aggression that is inspiring to a lot of young kids, I'm sure. And then some other guys. Jerry Jones had a good day. Ran a really fast 40. So if you're a corner, that is a good little moniker to help teams take a flyer on you later in the draft. So I think he will definitely get picked. I think Johnny Wilson, it was going to be hard to pass over a 6'7" wide receiver. I won't lie to you, but he showed off his ability. He did his thing, and I think he will definitely be probably a day 3 draft guy, but plenty talented. And when you're 6'7", you can do a whole lot of things. And then Jaheim Bell, the tight end, showed his versatility, did a ton of really, really good things. We've talked about this tight end group. It feels like it only gets stronger every single day, but Jaheim Bell is one of those guys, kind of like Jatavian Sanders, where kind of more of a pass-catching wide receiver type tight end that has been kind of taking over the NFL the last little bit. So Jaheim Bell, I think, had a really good day, and probably another third-day pick if I had to guess. But a great end to a great year for Florida State. Obviously, tons of outside stuff, the playoff drama, the battle with the ACC, opting out during the Georgia game that did not necessarily go to their liking. But at the end of the day, Florida State had a very, very solid day and helped themselves continue to build what they started a year ago. And then let's get to the big dogs. And by that, I mean the Georgia Bulldogs. They had a day. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone out there. I think the only negative to Georgia's day was some people said that Brock Bowers came off a little bit quiet, or just didn't come off quite as well as he would have hoped in the interviews. And I think knowing Brock Bowers through watching press conferences and different things, the dude's a very introverted guy. He is not overly comfortable talking to a big group of people. That is very obvious. So I don't think this is necessarily a detrimental thing. I don't think it hurts him at all. I just think it's kind of the way he is. But when you get him on the football field, there are very few people that can do what he can do. So I don't think it'll be a problem for him at all. But Ladd McConkey was the one of the Bulldogs that really stole the show, had an incredible day. I've seen mocks with him in the first round. So this wide receiver group is all over the place. I'm sure there are a ton of different boards out there with a ton of different rankings, but Lad McConkey had an incredible day, showed off what he's best known for, which is just doing everything very cleanly, whether that's route running or catching every ball that comes towards him, or just playing in a straight line. If you look up his gauntlet drill, it's just remarkable how down the line he was that entire time, catching every pass and being laser focused on that. So very impressive. And then the offensive tackle, Amarius Mims, just a specimen of a human. There are so many tackles in this group, and I'm sure they're like top 6 guys. I can't even think of all the different names that will probably go in the first round, but I think Amarius Mims will be one of them. So tons of offensive tackles to pick from. Amarius Mims is a guy that I think could be a 10-year starter in the NFL because his physical ability is obvious. It's just, drilling down some of the finer points, which is pretty easy to do when you got the frame that he's got. So definitely a great day for him. 3 guys on the defensive side of the ball. Javon Bullard and Kamari Lassiter had incredible days. Both of them showed off a lot of the actual football ability they had. They tested really well, no doubt about that. Kamari Lassiter had the best 3-cone drill in the entire draft process, but in the ball drills, that's really where they shined. Everything looked so smooth, everything looked fluid, no wasted motion, so ton to like about both those guys. And then Tyke Smith had a really solid day, ran a very fast 40, I think 4.46 if I'm not mistaken, and just did a ton of really good things and showed off, his knowledge for football because he's played a ton of it. So for Georgia, it's the rich keep getting richer. There's no two ways about that. I think Georgia will be on this list until further notice, honestly. But another team that is losing a ton of guys, sent the most guys to the combine in a very, very long time, is the Michigan Wolverines. And I think they had a really, really solid day. Not necessarily, kind of up and down with some of their guys, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of their guys made a ton of money, which is the ultimate goal here. So J.J. McCarthy was the talk of the town. Obviously, with the top 3 quarterbacks out, I think he played himself into the quarterback 4 role, or at least that's what the people making the mock draft seem to think. So I'm going to roll with them for the time being. And then their wide receivers, Roman Wilson, did his thing. He showed off his ability. Cornelius Johnson had a solid day. I think will probably be a 3rd-day pick, but did a ton of really good things and showed off his ability. And then Blake Corum did what he expected to do. He is forceful. 27 reps of 225 on bench is horrifying for a guy that size, but he's a beast, so there's no two ways about that. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you had Mike Sandristril, perfect workout. When you look at the ball drills and you watch him in particular, everything is perfect. It's hard to find a flaw in this kid, and I think whoever gets him is going to have a starting nickel from day one, and he is going to play really, really good football for you. So everyone should be excited about that. And then Chris Jenkins, the defensive tackle, really had a solid day, showed his athletic ability, and probably played himself up a couple of rounds because of the need that some teams have for defensive tackles, and the number of defensive tackles that will go a little bit earlier, with some teams wanting to wait until the 3rd day. I think Chris Jenkins is a guy that you could pick up a little later in the draft that would help your team immensely right away. And then finally, another team that was at the top of the world in college football a year ago, Washington. Michael Penix kind of led this group, obviously, had a good day, showed off his ability, can really spin that ball, has huge hands, that spiral is a thing of beauty. But I think he's probably sitting at quarterback 5 right now. It's hard to tell. I'm sure between him and Bo Nix, there are a lot of different iterations of that order, but I think he had a really good day. He did everything that he could have done. And then the receivers had an incredible day, whether it was Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan had a solid day, but Rome Odunze really stole the show. He did everything just at an elite level, especially for his size. I don't know if some of you saw that clip of him staying out on the field to do the three-cone drill because he refused to leave before he got a 6'6". It just shows you the type of guy he is, and I'm sure there were scouts out there that absolutely love to see that because the dudes that stay after practice are the dudes that get to the Hall of Fame, right? So definitely a good sign for him. I think there are plenty of people that have him as wide receiver one. I'm sure if you go around different front offices, you will find any order of him, Malik Neighbors, and Marvin Harrison Jr. you could imagine. So I don't think there's any big separation between that group. And then some under-the-radar guys. Devin Culp, the tight end, had a remarkable day. Ran a 4.47 at tight end, which is just insane. And then Roger Rosengarter had a very, very good day. Troy Fatanu as well. Two offensive tackles that in this offensive tackle class are among some of the best. So tons to like about this Washington group. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Braylon Trice had a really, really good day. Ula Foshio had a really, really good day as well. Both of them showed their athletic ability, which was on full display if you watch Washington throughout last year. So I think both those guys, whether it's day 2 or day 3, I think they can come in and really surprise some people and be contributors pretty quickly for a team. I know all these teams were kind of the obvious teams, I think 5 of the top 6 teams from a year ago, which makes sense, but it definitely does help these teams in recruiting when you can go into people's houses and say, look at our guy break the 40-yard dash, or look at our guy go top 5 after balling out at the combine. Tons to work with in the recruiting world after the combine. So those teams really, really helped themselves. They did a ton of really good things, and I'm sure they will be capitalizing off that in the recruiting show going forward. But we're going to take another break here, and we come back. We're going to talk position coaches, some guys that you might not know the names of, that either took over for someone that needs to fill big shoes or just needs to deliver in a year that their team has a chance to really strike. So we will get into all of that right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back. We just talked about some teams that won the combine, some teams that gained some much-needed recruiting pitch help during this weekend. But now it's time to get into some position coaches, some guys that you might not know the name of, but you will very shortly because they are working up the ranks to be a head coach, or they came down from a head coach to be a position coach at a school. So tons of guys to get to. Let's start with a guy that just took his job about a week ago, Josh Crawford, the new running back coach at UGA. He is replacing someone that is not easy to replace. Del McGee is one of the best running back coaches and coaches in the entire country. Did an incredible amount of things at UGA and had a litany of remarkable running backs to show his ability. But Josh Crawford comes in with a lot of energy. An elite recruiter coming from Georgia Tech, did a ton of really good things in his couple of years there. But I think the biggest thing about him is he coached in high school in Georgia for about a decade. Coached at a ton of really, really good programs. Colquitt County, a very, very talented program just about 40 miles north of me. That is always in the conversation. He coached there for a time. So tons of relationships across the entire state. Everyone knows who he is. Everyone respects him for, jumping up the ranks and obviously being at a program like UGA now. So when UGA goes out on these recruiting visits, whether it's a running back or a wide receiver or a quarterback, pretty much I think priority recruits will be getting to see Josh Crawford very, very consistently, because he is someone that can obviously make relationships very quickly. And I think good news for him is he has one of the best running back duos he could ask for in Trevor Etienne and Branson Robinson. Etienne we'll get into a little bit more later, but plenty of guys to pick from, plenty of great athletes, and obviously that offensive line is going to be solid under Stacey Searles, so I don't think there's any worry about that. So Josh Crawford is walking into a tough situation, taking over for Del McGee, no two ways about that, but definitely an advantageous one to live up to the hype, as it were. So very excited to see what he can do. I think he's going to be a quick riser in this industry. And then a guy that kind of took an interesting path to get to the position he is now, Maurice Lindquist, the DB coach at Bama. He took over for Travarius Robinson, who found his way to UGA as the defensive coordinator. And that is a tough task. Just like Del McGee, Travarius Robinson has cultivated an immense amount of respect for the development that he can pull off, the recruiting ability, the ability to create a connection with his players, all these things that are just remarkable that he did. And Maurice Lindquist has got to live up to that, which is not easy. He has a number of guys that have left in the portal that he probably didn't even get to meet before they left in the portal. So there will be some relying on younger guys. Jalen Makuba, Xavier Mincy, both those guys will have to be ready to roll, and Lindquist will be a big part of that equation if they are ready to roll. And then adding Keon Saab from Michigan is huge. It gives a little bit of stability to a room that had been a little bit shaky to start the off season. A little bit of worry, I'm sure, around Tuscaloosa about that, and it feels like they have the guys. It's just putting them in position to win at this point. So Lindquist is going to be very important to do that, and coming from a head coaching position at Buffalo, where that secondary, I watched it a ton because it was one of the teams I covered while doing some scouting for a sports data company, but they had a really good back end. Tons of guys that played really well. A guy that I love, Devin Grant, that's used. And a lot of that is Lindquist. He's very, very talented. So it'll be very interesting to see how all that takes shape, because if it doesn't take shape the way Alabama fans want, it could be a little bit of tough time for Maurice Lindquist in Tuscaloosa. But let's move on to another guy that is filling shoes that I would not want to be in his position. I'll put it that way. Kenny Baker, the new D-line coach at Texas. This is the business, right? Every now and then you'll have to take over for some of the best guys in the game because they move up. There was, I'm sure Glenn Schumann, when he was taking over for Dan Lanning, there were a lot of people doubting him because of how good Dan Lanning is. And can you match that energy? There is a big question mark there. But Kenny Baker taking over for Bo Davis is about as tough as it gets, I'll be honest. As you all remember, I'm sure, the remarkable, infamous rant that he had after the Iowa State game in Steve Sarkisian, his first year at Texas. Every Texas fan, including myself, will tell you that was the turning point. That was the moment that everyone realized this isn't going to be another Tom Herman or Charles Strong era, because the people around the head coach are this guy. So a ton of respect for Bo Davis. I mean, one of the best developers, I lost it, but one of the best developers, one of the best recruiters, one of the best people in that program over the last couple of years for Sark's tenure. And going back to LSU, his alma mater, can't even do for that by any means. But Kenny Baker walking into a situation that's a little bit precarious as well, kind of Maurice Lindquist type setup where no Tavondre Sweat, no Byron Murphy, a lot of guys that have the chance to make that jump. Jere Bledsoe has made huge jumps in offseason, it seems. Alfred Collins is a personal favorite of mine that I think will take a big step forward. And I think Kenny Baker is an interesting hire for a number of reasons, but namely, he comes from the NFL. He was the assistant D-line coach in the at the Dolphins this past year, and a very popular guy around there. Mike McDaniel, excuse me, spoke very, very highly of him, along with pretty much everyone else in that franchise. So, someone that I think Texas fans are very excited about. But at the end of the day, a ton of work to do, because if the interior defensive line for Texas is not solid, if it's a little bit porous at times, it could be a very long year for their first year in the SEC. But another D-line coach that has been around for a while at his school, but finally has a chance to have the most disruptive group he's had in a really, really long time. Randall Joyner, the line coach at Ole Miss, huge transfer portal class. Obviously, adding Walter Nolan is huge. Another guy we will get to later. There's so many incredible players that he picked up, whether it's edge guys or interior guys. They have Sunshine Perkins as a edge rusher out there, so tons to work with. There's no two ways about that. But at the end of the day, when you bring in a big transfer portal class, there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of putting guys together. There are a lot of working out rotations and where guys fit into the puzzle, and it doesn't always work out smoothly. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles all the different transfer portal guys that he brought in, all the different moving parts, and take advantage of this year, because at the end of the day, this seems to be the year for Ole Miss. There is so much talk about how good the offense is going to be, how good Jackson Dart is going to be, but the defense is where their season is going to be decided. There's no two about that. And they've done a great job bringing guys in the transfer portal, but putting it together falls on the position coaches. So for Randall Joyner and his group of position coaches on the defensive side of the ball to get into order, I think it does help a lot having the back end of this defense be more solid than it has been in the past. Adding Trey Amos from Alabama is absolutely huge. Was a great guy for them late on in last season. So I think it does help this D-line kind of attack the quarterback, which is what a lot of these guys do incredibly well. So very excited to see what he can do. Tons of guys to look forward to, but if they can't put together, as we know, interior defensive line and defensive line play overall is what wins in the SEC. So he has a ton on his shoulders. And then finally, let's jump back to the offensive side of the ball. Joey Halsell, the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach at Tennessee, one of the most interesting guys in the entire country, I think all of us agree, is Nico Iamaleava. He is a guy that absolutely has every chance, has all the potential in the world, will be put in situations where he'll be on full display. And he really had a very, very solid bowl game against Iowa, but at the end of the day, it's something of a Joe Milton effect, where he has a really good bowl game against Clemson, and then things don't go so well next year. So you want to avoid that as much as you can. But Halsell has been the quarterback coach for some time now, so he was around when Hendon Hooker had an incredible year a couple of years ago, and probably should have been in New York if you ask me, but that's none of my business. I think now that he's the play caller, it's all on him, right? The earnest of this offense is entirely on him. Obviously, having Josh Heupel to help and to assist is incredibly important, but there's a lot on him, and you have to make things easy for Nico, because he's still a young guy, and he's going to go through those growing pains just like anyone else. So it'll be a big task for him to put him in winning situations. But he'll have plenty to work with to do that. Squirrel White, Chaz Nimrod, and Brew McCoy, all back this year, all super important to this team, can do a ton of really good things. And you got to figure out that run game after Jalen Wright walked out the door, but still tons to like about this team and a ton to work with for Joey Halsell and company. So I'm very excited to see what he can do. He will be a very important person if Tennessee is going to make a run in the SEC, like a lot of people think they can do, much like Ole Miss. So tons of guys to look forward to. That is not an exhaustive list by any means. Tons of behind-the-scene unsung heroes in the SEC that make it go. So we will definitely come back to that segment. I think we'll bounce around to different conferences as we do, and then work back around, because there are tons of guys that did not get recognition here that absolutely deserve it. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, it's all about transfer portal acquisition. We're going to talk about the top 10 impact transfers going into 2024. Tons of really talented guys were on the move, so it was a hard list together, but I think I got a solid top 5 going. But stick with us, and we will be right back. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the most important position coaches in the SEC this upcoming year, and now it's time to talk transfer portal, because, man, this has been a crazy transfer portal era. There have been so many guys flying around to different schools, and it's been a little bit hard to keep track of. But I'm going to give you my top 10 impact transfers for this upcoming year. They will decide a lot for their teams. They will decide a lot for conference races in some scenarios. So let's jump right in, because this is a very, very interesting topic, and I want to make sure that we... I don't know why that did that. I apologize. There we go. We're all set now. But tons of incredible guys on the move, and it was very, very hard to make this list. There's no two ways about that. There are so many guys that could have been on this list that I bounced around with, but this is the 10 I landed on. I feel pretty good about it. Let's start at number 1, Caleb Downs. And obviously, Caleb Downs is not a quarterback. He is not going to have the biggest effect on the game for the Ohio State Buckeyes this upcoming year, but if you were to ask me, he's the best player in the country. So when the best player in the country jumps to another power program from Alabama to Ohio State, it's an impact transfer. There's no two ways about that. This Ohio State defense has taken a ton of steps forward since Jim Knowles has shown up a couple of years ago. But at the end of the day, this back end of this defense has been at times just missing a little bit. It feels like they're one elite guy away from being absolutely locked down on that back end. So I realize now it says top 10 returning quarterbacks. That is not correct, obviously. Top 10 impact transfers. I apologize for that. But Caleb Downs is a remarkable player. He can do so many things incredibly well and will have a huge impact on the Big Ten and the title race, because when you're at Ohio State, you're going to be in both those things. So let's continue on down the list. We got a couple of quarterbacks back-to-back here. Dylan Gabriel going to Oregon is huge for Oregon. Losing Bo Nix is a huge loss, and there were second there where people were wondering what was going to be the next step for them. Was it going to be Ty Thompson taking over the reins? But they went out and found Dylan Gabriel, and then they went out and found Dante Moore. But I tend to believe Dylan Gabriel will be the guy at the end of the day, and he is someone that is very much like Bo Nix, has athletic ability. Bo Nix is definitely more athletic when it comes to running the ball, but is very accurate, can get the ball out efficiently, is very smart, can do a number of things that are pretty remarkable. So I think he's someone that Oregon's going to love. I think he can be in the Heisman race, the Big Ten race, the playoff race, and maybe even the title race. He can bring Oregon to the level that Dan Lanning has been kind of waiting for. And then Cam Ward, someone that came from Washington State to Miami, kind of got out of that Pac-2 while it was still good to get out, and then Miami needed a quarterback a year ago. They had some injuries. Tyler Van Dyke was not playing up to his normal standard, so there was a lot of worry. And then Cam Ward decided to drop out of the NFL draft and come back to school, and he picked Miami, and I think it totally changes their season. They have Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, and company, plenty to work with, and I think he opens up the playbook, which is something Shannon Dawson really loved to do while at Houston, but I think the overall athletic ability of Tyler Van Dyke and Emory Williams kind of limited that a little bit at times, but Cam Ward is going to open that back up, no problem about that. So I think he's going to be very interesting. I think Miami second currently in odds to win the ACC after Clemson and Florida State, who are tied up atop. So wide open. They have every chance to jump in and make some noise, and Cam Ward will be a huge part of that. And then let's get to the defensive side of the ball again. We got Walter Nolan going to Ole Miss. I talked about him a little bit earlier. But he's as important of a player for Ole Miss as really anyone, not named Jackson Dart, I should say. He is everything for this defense because an elite interior defensive line in the SEC brings you a ton of different places, and that's exactly what Ole Miss has been missing when they've been missing the SEC championship by just a little bit every single year. So I think adding Walter Nolan is a huge step forward, but he's going to have to do a lot. He's going to have to be an absolute dude week in and week out for them to compete on a consistent basis, and I think he will do it. I don't think there's any question about that. I think he's a top 5 player in the country, and he totally transforms that defense and the team. So the SEC will be seeing a lot more of Walter Nolan this year, and maybe he is the thing that gets Ole Miss over that hump. And then Trevor Etienne, the running back that found his way from Florida to UGA. So definitely some bad blood down in Gainesville for Trevor Etienne, I'm sure. But UGA was kind of in an interesting situation that they have not been in recently. The running back room was not going to be the best room in their building, which is not something that they're used to. There are always dudes in that room, but adding ETN gives you the guy, gives you that number one running back, and then everyone else slots down a position and everything makes sense. I think it's a lot like adding Caleb Downs to the back end of Ohio State, where it just gives everything into the right position and gives you the right amount of players to really explode in the running game, and that's what Mike Bobo needs. Him and Branson Robinson are going to batter teams a lot. They're going to do a ton of really incredible things, and if they can't, then UGA overall could suffer because that pass game has a lot of play action in it. So using that run game is going to be super important. But Trevor Etienne is a guy I'm honestly watching for the Doak Walker Award because we know that guys at UGA are going to have their yards. But Trevor Etienne is a special guy that can break a lot of big plays. So I would be very interested to see what he can do in a UGA uniform this year. And then another guy that found his way out of UGA, actually, Brock Vandegrift. Any quarterback coming into the SEC has a ton on his shoulders. But I think Vandegrift's situation is especially tense and an especially pressure-filled situation, not only because he came into school as a very, very highly rated recruit. He sat for a while at Georgia, and now he's finally getting a shot, but also Kentucky's in a position that they could definitely strike this season. I mean, Jamori Macklin and Barian Brown in the outside is awesome. You have Demi Sumo Karingbe and Chip Trainum in the backfield next to you. Very solid group. The offensive line is going to be good. Marquez Cox is one of the best offensive linemen in the entire conference. So there's a lot of stuff in place for this Kentucky team. The defense returned a ton of guys. So a lot of this is in place, but at the end of the day, it's Vandegrift. It's the guy that, it comes down to for a lot of teams. The quarterback is going to decide so many things for so many different teams, and Vandegrift is no different. But he's got to get off on the right foot with new OC Bush Hamden that came over from Boise State. If he can, Kentucky's in a very interesting position where maybe some teams are overlooking them, talking about Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, Bama, all these very interesting teams at the top of the SEC. But at the end of the day, Kentucky is a team that's sitting right there just waiting to strike. And if Brock Vandegrift can get off and rolling, they might just be able to. Let's move on down here. Isaiah Bond, a very, very good receiver coming over to Texas from Alabama after Nick Saban retired. Led Bama in receptions a year ago, which is a very good thing for Texas because they lost a ton of experience in that room. They were literally returning 8 total catches in the career of everyone in that wide receiver room until Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden and Silas Bolden all came in, because they have totally fixed that. And we won't know what all that looks like until we get on the field, but Isaiah Bond is super important. A.D. Mitchell, Worthy, and Whittington all out the door, so they have to have a leader in that room. They have to have a guy to turn to, a veteran that can kind of show them what work looks like. And Matthew Golden, I think, will be a huge part of that as well. But Isaiah Bond is going to be a huge part of this offense, a huge part of the wide receiver room, and plays a huge role. I'm sure of that. So him and Quinn just have to get off on the same page, because it could be, tough sledding if Quinn and these new receivers are not on the same page, on the same timing to start the year, because there's some tough games to start the year, especially going to Michigan in the second week. But let's keep it rolling here. We'll go back to a couple of edge rushers, the next two guys. Tyler Barron finding his way to Louisville. Took a little bit of a side route, went committed to Ole Miss, and then decided to come back to Louisville. So a huge pull for Jeff Brom, obviously a huge need for this team with a lot of guys going out the door. But if Louisville is going to match up what they did a year ago, this defense is going to have to be a huge part of it. I think Jack Plummer came in with a very good understanding of the offense that they were running. I think Tyler Shuck is coming in with a little bit less of an understanding. So it might be a little bit slower of a start on the offensive side of the ball, and the defense is going to have to come up for that. So the teams that get pressure in the ACC, the teams that get pressure across the country really, are the teams that tend to find themselves in championship weekend and possibly even in the playoffs. So Tyler Barron is super important to this Cardinals team. I think they're going to do a ton of really good things this year, but at the end of the day, guys like Tyler Barron and really that entire defensive side of the ball are just going to be massive for those teams. And then Nick Scourton, a guy that you might not know right now, but you absolutely will at the end of next season. He had 10 sacks a year ago at Purdue, and then found his way over to Texas A&M to join Mike Elko in his first year. And this is something that Texas A&M needed, because there has been a lot of turnover there, a lot of guys transferring out, a lot of guys transferring in. But Nick Scourton is a guy transferring in is going to give you a lot of quality reps. He's going to give you possibly 10 sacks like he did a year ago. So in a world where sometimes in the transfer portal you're taking a chance on a kid, or sometimes someone walks out that's very important to your team production-wise, bringing in a guy that had 10 sacks a year ago never hurts anything. So I'm sure Texas A&M and Mike Elko are very excited to have him there. He's going to be a huge part of that defense and that team's success over this year. And then finally, another quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei, a guy I really enjoy. I think he's a very, very good quarterback and very efficient. And I think he's become more so throughout his college career. Started at Clemson, obviously, found his way to Oregon State for a year, and then is now back in the ACC with Florida State. Ton to like about this kid. Obviously, replacing Jordan Travis is not an easy thing to do from an on-the-field perspective, but nearly impossible when you talk about off the field, because he had such an effect on this team. He did so many incredible things for the culture for this team, for the energy, for getting them to 13-0 after he went down. It's hard to express how much he meant to that team. But DJ Uiagalelei is kind of cut from the same cloth. He is a great leader. He is someone that has a great head on his shoulders and does a lot of really, really good things on the field. So I think if you needed a replacement for someone that can probably not be replaced, I think you found a pretty good one in DJ. So he's has a ton to work with, obviously. Ton of different guys coming in from the transfer portal, like Malik Benson, Roydell Williams from Alabama, that will help him along the way and make this a really fun process. And then, obviously, Mike Norvell, one of the best offensive minds in the country, he has a chance to make a statement. They have a chance to follow up a season where they got disrespected in some ways, they got pushed to the side, and they can follow it up with a great season, but DJ is going to be as big a part of that as anyone. So it'll be very interesting to see how all of that comes into play. I mean, there's so many different guys that I could have gotten to. I'm sure there are guys that I missed. So definitely let me know in the comments your top 10 or some guys that I just straight up missed on that I need to have in the honorable mentions, or I need to have in my top 10 if we do this again. But that's about it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review, like the stream, do all that type of stuff. It makes a huge difference for us here at the show. And then also follow us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, X, or Twitter. I tend to call it Twitter at this point. But TikTok, Instagram, all of those for all the content updates across every single sport you could think of. We have tons of really incredible people doing great work over here. So, follow over there for any and all updates you could possibly need. But thank you so much for listening, and I will see you tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad